everyone. In this fourth lecture on human reproduction, we are going to discuss about the fertilization process. After that, how the development will be, how the parturition, that is the delivery of the baby will be, and finally how the baby's nutrition will be supported initially by the process, that is lactation. Right, in the earlier lecture, we have seen the menstrual cycle, where we understood that all the copulations will not lead to fertilizations and pregnancy. The reason is there must be synchrony, that is, the ovum and the sperm have to be transported simultaneously to the ampullary region. That's where the fertilization occurs. So, when the ovum is released, entering into the ampulla, at the same time, the sperm has to reach the ampulla. Then only the fertilization will occur. So, based on that, we have seen that the chances of fertilization will be higher in this fertile period, which will be 10 to 17 days of menstrual cycle. So if the fertilization occur beyond this, that is before this 10 or after the 17 days of menstrual cycle, the fertilization will not occur. So maximum chances will be in this particular period only. Now, when there is a synchrony, that is when the sperm enter into the fallopian tube and ovum also enter into the fallopian tube at the same time. Now this leads to the fertilization. So how this fertilization occur and what are the changes that has to happen during this fertilization, we'll see in detail now. Now the first thing is insemination occur in this vagina. Now the semen has to pass through this cervical canal and they have to cross this uterus and finally enter into the fallopian tube. This is where the fertilization will occur. That is, in the ampullar region, the fertilization will occur, which means there are certain obstacles, there are certain factors which will not allow the sperms to enter into this particular region. These particular factors include, one thing is the acidic pH in the female reproductive tract. So the pH in this female reproductive tract will be acidic, which will actually decreases the sperm's motility and viability also. Next, thick endometrium. So here the endometrial thickness will be so high. So here some amount of thickness is shown. This thickness is so high that the sperms have to cross this endothelial layer. So they have to pass through these layers, pass through these regions and finally enter into this ampullar region. So this is another problem for the sperms to enter into the ampulla. Next, phagocytosis that may happen in the female reproductive tract. These are all the factors that actually prevent the sperms to enter into the ampullar region. Next, the amount of sperms present in one ejaculation, we have seen it is around 200 to 300 million sperms are released. So as the number of sperms are increased, as the number of sperms is so high, the chance of these sperms to pass through all these things and finally entering into the ampulla will be increased. So this is one factor that actually helps the sperms to enter into the ampullar region. Next thing is, we have seen in the semen prostaglandins are present. The prostaglandins can stimulate this uterus, which will make the wild contractions in this uterine muscles. This will help the semen, the coagulated semen, to pass upwards. So from here, once insemination occur, due to these prostaglandins, the uterus will contract and will make the semen to move upwards. Next, the sperms themselves are motile. So these are all the factors that helps the sperms to enter into the ampulla. So overall, by considering both these factors, the factors which actually helps the sperms to enter the ampulla and those who actually prevent the sperms to enter into the ampulla, the overall thing is only around 100 sperms can reach the ampulla. That is, out of 200 to 300 million sperms present initially after ejaculation, only 100 can reach this particular region because of these factors. Once the semen present in the female reproductive tract, one of the important change that happens in the sperms is capacitation. So this capacitation is the process where the sperms will become competent and they'll be facilitated by certain changes. so that the competency of the sperms will be increased. So here this capacitation will occur in the female reproductive tract only. Once insemination occur, then only this capacitation will occur. This uterus will aid in this capacitation process. So there are two important effects of this capacitation. One is destabilization of acrosomal sperm head, this particular membrane of this sperm head. That is, we have seen the sperm head consists of acrosome. This membrane will be destabilized. Next, there will be certain chemical changes in the tail also. And important chemical changes include the removal of sterols. So the membrane of uh, the outer membrane consists of sterols. These sterols will be removed. That is one of the important chemical change that happens. Overall, because of this destabilization of acrosomal sperm head membrane, there will be release of this one will cause the acrosomal contents to release and can help in the penetration of the sperm into the ovum, which we will see in the next few slides. Next, the chemical change in the tail will make the increased mobility in the sperm. So that is, the sperm motility will be increased because of this particular change. So overall, capacitation is the one that makes that increases the sperm's motility, and also it actually makes the sperms competent for the fertilization once it reaches the ampulla. So once it reaches the ampulla, now say ovum is present in the ampulla and sperms also enter into the ampulla. Now the sperms have to penetrate into the ovum. So here the important thing that is actually makes the species recognition is here when the sperms enter into this ampulla, the ovum actually release certain factors called fertilizins. So these are the fertilizins, which consists of spermophilic sites. So this is the fertilizin, and these are the spermophilic sites. This one, this one, this one. Now the sperm's membrane consists of antifertilizins. So there is a recognition between antifertilizin and fertilizin. This will give the species recognition. So we know the sperms from one species will fertilize only the ovum from the same species. That recognition is because of this fertilizin and antifertilizins. Now we know that basically fertilization is fusion of the membrane of the sperm and the egg, which is comparatively very easy process because it is just membrane fusion only. But penetrating the protective layers of the ovum is the challenge for the sperm. Here, these layers include corona radiata, that is a cellular layer that is present surrounding the ovum. This is corona radiata. So the sperm has to pass through this. Now it has to pass through the zona pellucida, and there is a perivitelline space and vitelline membrane. Then only the plasma membrane will be reached. So how these various things can be possible? How the sperm can penetrate all these layers and finally reach the plasma membrane, we'll see. So yeah, once the sperm reaches this zona pellucida region, just before that, there will be one important reaction that happens, which is called acrosomal reaction. Again, the location of this acrosomal reaction is ampulla. See, that is, when the sperm is present in the ampulla region, then this acrosomal reaction will occur. So in this acrosomal reaction, the contents of the acrosome. So we have seen a cap-like structure is present on the sperm's head here. The contents of this acrosome will be released. In this, the important components are hyaluronidase, corona penetrating enzymes, and acrosome. Actually, this corona radiata consists of these corona radiata cells will stick together due to one compound called hyaluronic acid that will be digested by this hyaluronidase. Therefore, the sperms are able to penetrate through this corona radiata. Next, corona penetrating enzymes also will help in this, and finally, acrosin can help in this uh, entry of sperm into this zona pellucida. So acrosin will dissolve this zona pellucida and will help the sperm to pass through this zona pellucida. So this is how the acrosomal reaction can help the sperms to penetrate and reach the plasma membrane of the ovum. Now, once the sperm reaches this plasma membrane, once this sperm is fused with the plasma membrane of the ovum, now there will be one important change that happens in the layers of this ovum. That is one of the important changes, this cortical reaction, where earlier we have seen just below this plasma membrane there are cortical granules. In the ovum, just below the plasma membrane there are cortical granules. These cortical granules will fuse with the plasma membrane. So it is something like this. So plasma membrane, below that there are cortical granules. These cortical granules will fuse with the plasma membrane. This is cortical reactions. This makes the vital membrane lifted. So the vital membrane will be lifted and will become barrier called a fertilization membrane. This one will form the barrier called fertilization membrane. So once this fertilization membrane is formed, it will not allow the further entry of any sperm. Therefore, once one sperm enter into this cross this plasma membrane, the remaining sperms will not be allowed to pass. So this one will act as the barrier for this polyspermy. That is, many sperms cannot enter into the ovum because of this fertilization membrane. So this cortical reaction will make the formation of fertilization membrane that prevents the polyspermy. So overall reactions, when you just look into that, here the first thing that we have seen was the sperm migrates to the coat of this follicular cells and finally will bind with the zona pellucida, receptors present in the zona pellucida. Now this binding induces the acrosomal reaction, right, which releases various components, and then plasma membrane of the ovum and the plasma membrane of the sperm will be fused. The contents will be released and then cortical reaction will occur. This is a cortical reaction which will form this fertilization membrane. So this is how various events takes place during the fertilization process. Now when this fertilization starts, that is once the ovum is fused with the sperm, the very important change that happens inside the ovum is it completes the second meiotic division. So in the earlier lecture we have seen during oogenesis process, the secondary spermatocyte will start undergoing meiosis too. But it can be completed only upon fusion with the sperm. So now this sperm entry will stimulate the reduction division 2 to complete. Therefore, secondary oocyte will produce ovum, that is egg or ooted, and one polar body will be produced. Now the nucleus of the sperm and the ovum will fuse, which results into the formation of zygote. So this is where the zygote will be formed. Now zygote will undergo divisions. See, we know zygote will undergo mitotic divisions. Therefore, whatever the number of cells that adult an organism consists, all those cells are produced from the zygote through mitosis only. But before the blastocyst formation, that is before the implantation occur, the zygote will undergo one special kind of mitotic divisions called cleavages. So the zygote will undergo cleavages initially. Cleavage is same as mitosis with respect to the chromosomal distribution, which means when one cell is divided, two genetically identical, see one diploid cell when undergo mitosis, two cells are produced. Right. But in the case of mitosis, these daughter cells will increase in size and only after attaining certain nucleoplasm to cytoplasm ratio, then only they will divide. But in the case of cleavages, zygote will undergo division. Say like this, they undergo division. Now these are the daughter cells. These daughter cells will not increase in size, they will remain as such. Again they will divide. Therefore, the cytoplasm content in the daughter cells will be decreased. In each cleavage, the cytoplasm content in the daughter cells will be decreased. So in the first cleavage, if the cytoplasm content in the daughter cell is half of the parent cell. That's how the divisions will be. Now, initially, whatever the cells produced through these cleavages, they are called blastomeres. So these are the cells which are the result of these cleavages. So one zygote will produce 2 blastomeres, then comes the 4 blastomeres, 8, 16, like this 32, the different number will be. Now the stages that consists of 8 to 16 cells, that is 8 to 16 blastomeres. This particular stage is called morula. So zygote now producing morula. This will happen after the 72 hours of fertilization. So once the zygote is produced after 72 hours, now it will be in the morula stage. So now with respect to the location of these cleavages, when you just look into that particular aspect, now as we have seen, this is the ovum releasing the egg. Fertilization is taking place in the ampulla region. That's where the zygote is produced. Now the zygote will move towards the uterus. This movement is possible because of the contractions that happens inside the fallopian tube, and it is also having the cilia. So the zygote will start moving towards this uterus. During this process, it will undergo cleavages. So here you can see 4 cell stage and later 8 cell stage and 16 cell stage. So this is a morula stage. So by the time it reaches the uterus, it will be forming one stage, one hollow ball like stage called a blastocyst. So it is one solid ball mass you can say, but this one is hollow mass, hollow ball of cells. This is called blastocyst. This is the stage in which the embryo will be implanted in the endometrial wall of the uterus. The same thing in a different way of diagrammatic representation. This is the blastocyst. So by the time it reaches this uterus, it is in the blastocyst stage. Now, as we have seen, the blastocyst will be implanted in the endometrial layer, the thickness of which is increased during the menstrual cycle. The blastocyst consists of around 100 cells. In that, there will be one layer called a trophoblast or trophactodome. This is the outer layer. This is the space present in this hollow region called a blastocele. And this mass of cells that consists of around 20 to 25 cells, this is called inner cell mass. So basically one blastocyst consists of trophoblast or trophactodome, blastocele, the space inside that, and this is inner cell mass. Inner cell mass is the one that is going to produce the embryo. Trophactodome or trophoblast is the one that actually involved in the implantation. So this will attach with the endometrial layer and will be involved in the implantation process. So the function of this thing is implantation. So once the implantation is completed, now the blastula in the case of frogs and all, in the case of human it is called blastocyst. The blastocyst will form the next stage called gastrula. This is the stage where you can see for the first time these germ layers. The germ layers are formed. This is due to the movement of the cells present in this in different directions, which will form one structure called gastrula. So the gastrula consists of ectoderm, endoderm, and later mesoderm will also form. And this is the region called archenteron. And the opening of this archenteron is called blastopore. And in the animal kingdom, the development of the animals, we have seen the blastopore can develop into the mouth in protostomous organisms, whereas in the deuterostomous organisms, this one will develop into anus. The same way, the in the case of coelomates, the true eucoelomates, the coelom sometimes can produce as an invagination of this particular part, that is it will form from this archenteron, which is called enterocele, or the coelom can form as a splits in the mesoderm in the middle, which is called schizocele. So depending on the fate of this, we have divided the animals into different groups. Now coming to the development of these germ layers. So as we know, the triploblastic organisms consist of 3 germ layers, whereas the diploblastic organisms consist of 2 germ layers. So except in the sponges, in the remaining phyla, you can see these germ layers where the different germ layers will develop into different parts. So in the case of human, the ectoderm will form the central nervous system, that is brain and spinal cord, peripheral nervous system, epidermis and its derivatives, mammary gland, so etc. are produced from this ectoderm. Whereas the mesoderm will produce mainly the connective tissue, which includes cartilage, bone, muscular tissue, and organs of urinogenital system, that is kidneys, gonads. All these are produced from this mesoderm. Next, the heart is also produced from the mesoderm only. Now, endoderm, it will form the epithelium of gastrointestinal tract and respiratory tract, that is the inner lining, will be produced by this. Next, liver, pancreas, thyroid, parathyroid, all these are also produced from the endoderm only. So the 3 different germ layers are giving rise to different organs in our body. Now once this implantation is completed, the uterus, endometrial wall of the uterus will divide, and the and it will just surround the blastocyst. That's what we have seen in the implantation process. So once this thing is completed, there will be a connection established between these two called placenta. So the placenta basically consists of the villus, that is finger-like projections from the chorion. Chorion is one of the embryonic layer, which we'll see in the next figure. So the finger-like projections will form from this fetus. It is chorion of the fetus, like this, and the endometrial wall also will form the finger-like projections like this. Therefore, there will be interdigitation between the endometrial wall and this chorionic villi. That is, the surface area of the interaction is increased. So this is how the placenta will be. This only will develop into the placenta, and this is how the placenta will be. So basically placenta consists of the maternal portion of placenta. This part is the maternal portion of the placenta, that is decidua basalis. Technically it is called decidua basalis. Now from this fetus side, this is a chorion. So it is a fetal portion of placenta. So there is interdigitation. Now you can see the blood vessels from the mother and the blood vessels from the fetus. This is the umbilical cord that connects the placenta with the fetus. So here you can see this is the umbilical cord, this is the placenta. So umbilical cord basically consists of this umbilical vein, the arteries that will actually will be involved in the exchange of materials with the mother. So here the placenta can help in the gaseous exchange. So as the fetus cannot directly will be involved in the gaseous exchange, so it will be involved in the gaseous exchange, carbon dioxide oxygen exchange. The waste also will be exchanged, nutrients will be exchanged. So these are all the different things that will be exchanged. In addition to that, the placenta can also act as one endocrine gland. So it is helping in providing the nutrition and gases to the developing fetus, and also it is also acting as the endocrine gland. So this endocrine function is important for the maintenance of pregnancy and the later support of the newborn baby also. So we'll see these different hormones produced from this placenta. So as an endocrine gland, it will produce human chorionic gonadotropin. So we know the function of gonadotropins. This will help in the maintenance of estrogen and progesterone levels. Next, human placental lactogen, which is mainly produced in the later stages of pregnancy, can help in the production of milk in the mammary glands. So by the time the parturition completes, the newborn baby will be fed with the milk. So that will be ready because of this particular hormone. So we'll see how this helps in the production of milk. Next, in the later stages of pregnancy, placenta also produce relaxin hormone. This can help in the relaxation of the pelvic muscles and even the cervix also, which can help in the parturition process. So these three hormones, particularly human chorionic gonadotropin or HCG, human placental lactogen, relaxin, these three hormones are produced only during pregnancy. And in the confirmation of pregnancy, the pregnancy kit, whatever the kits that are used, there the basis is identification of HCG in the blood or in the urine. So in the pregnancy test, the basis is HCG hormone only. So in addition to these hormones, the levels of estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, prolactin, thyroxine, all these hormones levels will be increased during pregnancy. So increased levels of these hormones are important for the supporting of pregnancy and survival of the fetus. Say for example, we know the role of the thyroxine, which can help in the maintenance of basic metabolic rate. So as the mother has to support the fetus development, the increased metabolic rate is possible because of increased levels of thyroxine hormone. The same way prolactin can help in the development of the milk in the mammary glands. So cortisol, it's also one kind of glucocorticoid, so which is also helpful in the metabolism. So increased levels of these hormones are important for the support of pregnancy, that is the development of fetus. Now, if you just look into the various embryonic layers present in the surrounding this fetus, that is extra embryonic layers, when you just look into that, amnion, yolk sac, allantois, chorion, these are all the various extra embryonic membranes. In this amnion, so you can see the amnion here. This amnion is filled with the amniotic fluid. This is completely amniotic fluid. This will provide the buoyancy for this fetus which is present inside this, can help in the transport of exchange of various materials, and also helpful in the regulation of temperature. Next, chorion. So we have seen chorion will form the chorionic villi, which will be involved in the placenta formation. Next, yolk sac. So yolk sac will be smaller, but very important function of this yolk sac is in the early stages of the fetus development, the erythropoiesis, that is the production of RBC, will occur in the yolk sac only. In the later stages of fetus development, the same thing, RBC production will occur in the liver and spleen. Only after birth, the bone marrow will be involved in this process. So in the early stages of pregnancy, in the early stages of fetus development, in the fetus, yolk sac only will produce the RBC. And allantois will actually later develop into the urinary bladder. So overall, these extra embryonic membranes are helpful in the protection from the desiccation, that is the drying of the fetus. So it will provide the moisture and mechanical shock. So it will provide the buoyancy and will help in the prevention of mechanic shock. Next, absorption of nutrients and the exchange of gases also. This is the function of these various membranes surrounding the fetus. Now, the pregnancy in human is around 280 days or 40 weeks or 9 months. Now, when it comes to the various things, various developments that happens in the fetus, the important events when you just see, in the first month, heart will be developed. So first thing that you can observe that the fetus developed is, you can observe the heartbeat. Second month, limbs and digits will be developed. Third month, the development of limbs will be completed and major organ systems and genitalia also will form. And in the fifth month, hair on the head will form and first movements will start. And during the sixth month, the body hair will form, eyelids will open, eyelashes also will form. The same developments with respect to the trimesters, when you see, this one is with respect to the months. So when you just look into this, total in 9 months of period is divided into 3 parts. So each part is one trimester is. So here as it is 9 months and 3 parts, each trimester is 3 months obviously. So the first trimester, is a main period of organogenesis. You can see that. So this is the first trimester phase. Next, the second trimester phase is well formed with certain features, recognizable features, and the bones will become harder. And the third trimester, which is not shown in this table, so it's after the 6th month, that is the last 3 months, the fetus will be fully developed and it is ready for the delivery. Now there will be delivery of the baby once this development is completed, which is technically called parturition process. So in the parturition process, the increased levels of estrogen will initially stimulate the uterine contractions. The uterus contractions will increase, which will make the molding and downward movement of the fetus. The fetus will move downwards. This will dilate the birth canal, that is the cervix particularly will be dilated. This dilation will cause fetal ejection reflex, or it is also called a Ferguson reflex. So overall, the fully developed fetus and the placenta also will release certain signals. These signals will cause the uterine contractions. These uterine contractions will cause this fetal ejection reflex, which will stimulate the posterior pituitary to release the oxytocin. So, and we know the function of this oxytocin. It is actually involved in the contraction of the smooth muscles. Now this oxytocin will act on the uterus. Therefore, the uterus contractions will be further increased. This increased uterus contractions will increase these reflexes and again stimulate the posterior pituitary. Therefore, more amount of oxytocin is released. Again, it will stimulate the uterine contractions. So, overall thing is more and more oxytocin is produced and more contractions will occur, which finally lead to the parturition, that is the delivery of the well developed baby. Throughout the pregnancy, there will be the mild contractions which can be seen. They are called Braxton Hicks contractions. This will lead to the false labor. So they are not actually the true labor pains. So there may be some false labor because of these contractions. So once the parturition is completed, the newborn baby has to be supported with the nutrients. So for that, in the mammals, we have seen the mammary glands are developed, which will eject the milk, the highly nutritious fluid. So the secretion of milk, that is production and secretion of this milk, when you just look into that particular aspect. So here, the prolactin releasing factors, which are released because of HPL, that is human placental lactogen, which is produced at the later stages of pregnancy, will stimulate the prolactin releasing factors. These factors will act on the anterior pituitary and make the release of prolactin hormone. This prolactin hormone will make the lactogenesis, that is milk production. But the ejection of the milk from the alveoli and finally into the lactiferous ducts is because of oxytocin. This will help in the ejection of the milk. So prolactin hormone, oxytocin, both will be involved in the uh, production of milk, that is production of milk as well as the ejection of milk. In the initial stages of the lactation, the milk is actually called colostrum. This colostrum is actually one yellowish fluid, and it is the lactose content is less. So as we know, uh, the milk consists of lactose, sugar. The content of the lactose will be less in the initial stages, that is colostrum, and almost there is no fat at all. No fat at all. It is rich in proteins. So the colostrum is rich in proteins and also the vitamin A and certain minerals. That's why the colostrum is highly nutritious and it is very important for the development, proper development of the newborn baby. So in addition to that, the colostrum also consists of the antibodies. The antibody present here is IgA. So totally there are different in the various antibodies produced. IgA is the one that actually present in the colostrum. So totally 5 antibodies are present: IgG, IgA, IgD, IgM, IgE, among which IgA is present in the colostrum. This is the one that actually provides the passive immunity to the newborn baby. So this is how the fertilization and further development in the uterus, and finally the parturition will occur in the human beings, and how this newborn baby will be supported due to the lactation process. Thank you. Thank you very much.